couple people taking your patronizing tone, quite frankly, not very well about hockey. That's
too late to walk it back.
It's you, and he's right. He's putting you. He basically says neither you nor Johnny Athletic are welcome on the east side of the river.
Does it help that I feel the same way about the NBA? Maybe a little. This is not a hockey sport thing. It's NHL and NBA.
What do you got against pro basketball and pro hockey? I mean, are you one of those one of those football snobs?
No, I've become I'll get really interested when the playoffs start because the regular season is not.
Playoffs didn't go bad last year for the Wolves.
Yeah, and I watched it all.
Did you?
Yeah, I was in it. But I'm just saying I'm in the boat of the 80 whatever games in both leagues don't feel that interesting and consequential, and so especially when so many teams make the playoffs.
There was a sort of get off my yard discussion that I saw part of between Dan Patrick and Barkley on the subject of the NBA, and I only watched the short version, so but I was intrigued enough to maybe want to go back and watch more of it and see where they went. And it was Patrick was sort of the aggressor here, basically saying, Charles, your league's got some real problems right now, and for Patrick, it's the ongoing issues about stars playing, and then the number of 3-pointers, which is getting bigger every year, almost every game. Wolves shots 50-some the other night. They've been ordered to shoot more, and that the Patrick conclusion was it's not as interesting a game to watch right now because of it. And Barkley didn't disagree. And then Barkley said, well, we're going to get stereotyped, but it's not worth going into today because we're supposed to talk mainly, football with you because I'm a huge pro basketball guy. I did a lot of my work in that sport, but yeah, it's the old, I understand why teams are doing it in terms of the number of 3-pointers, but I don't think it's all that interesting. And I don't even know what you do about it because these things evolve for reasons, but it does feel like pretty much every team feels obligated to play the same way, and it doesn't make it very interesting when you don't have some clashing styles.
It's the same thing with baseball, and I think baseball is just a little bit further ahead in that the analytics, which is in essence to what's the most efficient path to victory, make the game less interesting. I don't think anyone who was trying to win an NBA game would tell you that you should shoot less 3-pointers because they are the most efficient way to do it. Football is probably the one sport where analytics have made it more interesting. I'd rather see a 4th down offensive play than a punt. I'd rather, see more aggressive passing than defense and run game. That's made it more entertaining, I think. But baseball and basketball, the efficiency is sometimes less interesting.
If you, right now, instead of being on with us, or on the Around the Horn show, which we can see on our big screen in here, and you are asked to answer the question they are attempting, the panel, that includes, by the way, my guy Sedano.
There he is.
I love Sedano. I liked him especially when he co-hosted a show with Stink. Remember the Sedano and Stink show?
Vaguely.
Oh, my God. This is brilliant. I just love saying Sedano and Stink over and over again.
Name.
It's just great. And the question on the table was, did the Tampa Bay head coach, what's his name?
Todd Bowles,
blow it, not going for 2 points with 27 seconds to go to try to win outright? Well, you can't say you won because it's 27 seconds to go with Mahomes.
Yeah.
But best chance to put it away, knowing that if you lose the coin flip, the game's probably over. Did Bowles blow it, not being bold?
Yeah, normally you would say no, because the analytics actually tell you that when teams do that, the other team is more aggressive and actually succeeds when they get the ball back in either taking the lead. If they're behind, they're going to be more desperate than if they're also playing for the tie. So normally you would say, no, there's not a big advantage in going for 2 and even getting it. But with Mahomes, the rules have to change.
Well, I fell asleep. When I did not see the tying touchdown.
Yeah.
And then what did Mahomes do? Did they just sit on it because it was tied? Or did they try?
No, they tried, but what happened is they got to 4th and 1 around midfield.
Okay, and then
I think they punted.
I remember it
and
now,
the punt,
yes.
And the punt took up the rest of the time. If it's 4th and 1 and you're losing, they're probably going for it, and Mahomes is probably making it.
Yes.
And so, like, that's like a tangible, it's a tangible thing.
Yeah.
Where Bowles really made a mistake is he called a timeout. They got like a 1st and goal at the 1, and they called timeout with 30 seconds.
When he didn't need that timeout.
You do not want to get, and he's lucky that Mahomes didn't win it in regulation. They gave it to him, and he's won with 13 seconds.
That's the bigger issue.
30.
That's probably the bigger issue. That timeout,
and it didn't affect the game because it went to overtime anyway. But that's where the big mistake was.
Yeah.
The secondary mistake is that normally you wouldn't. It doesn't matter if you go for 2. Like the analytics say, it'll even out. Mm-hmm. But against Mahomes, if you're on the road, you got a chance to take a lead, you should do it.
This is a good toss-up to get into. In part, what you've written, kind of a deep dive on the Vikings offense, playing off what both Jefferson and then the head coach said during the week, and then how the Vikings played offense in their victory over the Indianapolis Colts. Mike in New Richmond writes, I'm growing wary of so many people nitpicking Sam Darnold's play. Besides the rookie phenom, Jaden Daniels, who's on his rookie contract, Sam has the best team record on the lowest contract in the NFL. Do people seriously wish we had Cousins back? He is what he is. He's not our future, but shouldn't we just enjoy the season? That's Mike from New Richmond.
But like I didn't sense any like Darnold weariness or like, and maybe he's reading into like O'Connell saying that you have to remember Sam Darnold just signed with us. But like Darnold's basically playing better in his first year in the offense than Cousins did. So you go back to the 2022 season. And we get to the Thanksgiving game that the Vikings beat the Patriots in, and I remember that post game, Cousins is just like agonizing over. He's like, I can't, sometimes I wonder how we're winning these games based on how I'm playing. Like we've had other years where I don't think I can play any better and we lose. And this year, every game I come into the press room and I'm trying to think of ways to be positive about a game that I don't think I played very well in. So he himself was talking about how short of his expectations he was playing in this offense because it took him a while to adjust. And then by the end of the year, he was rolling pretty good. And then he started last season pretty well too before the injury. So I actually think Darnold is playing better in a lot of ways than Kirk did in his first year in the offense. Has he been perfect? No, but I don't think people should overreact to O'Connell saying we have to remember that he's in the first. And I don't know what else he's referring.
I don't think he's referring. I think he's just saying people criticizing him. Again, I mean, you wrote about it. The yin and the yang of it. When he was good, he was good. They did make good on their vows, I think, largely, which we'll get into, that you wrote about regarding simplifying things a little bit. On the other hand, if you've got a fumble and 2, I thought, pretty bad interceptions, that has to be factored into this thing.
Yeah. And you have to factor that in, and you factor it in with all the rest of the plays were
I like him better than Mullins. I'll agree with you.
Yeah. But I guess it depends on what your expectation of him was. If the expectation was that they had taken this guy off the trash heap and turned him into the next, Pro Bowl quarterback in the league, then I think those expectations were unrealistic. What they've done is taken a guy off the trash heap and made him certainly good enough to be the credible starter of a 6-2 team that has a great chance to make the playoffs, and he's done every bit his part on that in compiling that record.
Let's put a grand in somebody's hand if we can.
Fan and 2 men and a junk truck. Want to help with that? It's our national cash contest. The keyword is credit for the 4 o'clock hour. Go to KFAN.com and enter the keyword credit.
We'll go a little deeper in much of what Seifert had to write regarding some changes, some tweaking of the offense, and some numbers that are actually quite favorable, notwithstanding those 3 turnovers. More with Seifert. All right, so there was much discussion during the week. JJ kind of let the cat out of the bag that, well, we're kind of dumbing it down. I don't think that's the term he used, but basically that's what it sounded like. Simplifying, dialing it back. And then the head coach didn't really disagree with that. He put his own, word salad on it. And then the game took place. So did they make good on that? What do you think it meant? And how did it manifest itself in the game? And what does it mean going forward?
Yeah, I think what it meant was they were, at a very basic level, they were having a hard time lining up and getting the snap off before the play clock was ending. They were one of the top teams in the NFL in terms of delay a game. And then it was also manifesting itself in other pre-snap penalties, whether it's false starts or illegal formation or illegal shift. And each of those have their own reasons. But when you add it all together, you're saying like it appears to be a pretty chaotic pre-snap situation. So one of the things that I think everyone agreed they needed to do was find ways to make that less chaotic. Whether it's O'Connell kind of yesterday talked about the different ways they went about doing that. He said that they kind of dropped a few of what he called the exotic formations that they used. They still use a fair bit of motion, but not quite as much pre-snap motion. And he said, frankly, O'Connell needed to be better in terms of making sure he's getting the play to Darnold as soon as possible. If there was a big play and, beforehand and maybe there's some celebrating or discussion or about how that all went down or a questionable call and we're arguing with officials and let's not let any, seconds of the play clock go off there. And I know we talked about this in previous weeks and talked a little about the processing time and the organizational time for Sam, but was always post snap. The pre snap stuff I think was things that they felt they could address, and then I think the other part that Jefferson talked about or was referencing is we're gonna be at full strength. T.J. Hawkinson's coming back, Justin Jefferson obviously there, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, free three. Everybody's gonna be on the field. Let's rely on the players to make plays. And I think the phrase that he used, and it went right past me until I listened back. He said something like, we don't always have to have the most perfect play ever, or something along those lines.
Yes, that's an interesting quote.
It was, and he's very soft spoken. And he's not.
Yes, he doesn't. Right.
It's you almost don't realize that's pretty.
He's not Randy Moss.
No,
verbally.
And O'Connell didn't really push back on that. And so you put all that together, and I think they had one offensive penalty total in the game, and it was a hold on Cam Robinson. No pre-snap stuff. Darnold talked afterwards. He felt like they were in a good rhythm, get the play call, do the huddle, get on the line. And if you watched, there was a few times when they were getting near the end of the play clock, but nothing that looked like they were in a frantic situation. And that, if you can start the play in a calm place, then you have a much better chance of executing it well. And they had a ton of plays. They had 70 some plays, which is much more than 29 first downs, most plays in a game this season, most yards, most first downs, most time of possession, and the shortest amount of time that you're actually in each possession. So they were moving quicker and with the rhythm and timing of the offense. And so, had it not been for those turnovers, which, is a totally separate issue, it's a credible and legitimate issue, but separate from what we're talking about, they win probably 30 whatever to 13. And so even with 3 turnovers and even with losing the turnover battle, they managed to win the game. And so I think that's what that was all about. It was interesting and I think productive for them, and if there was any hard feelings, I didn't sense any of it. And they got to a better place.
Did the defense get a lot of itself back in this game, or did some of us utterly and completely overrate the Flacco fear factor? Because I felt sheepish as that game's playing out because I thought he looked miserable.
Yeah, there was, there was more than a few plays there to be made that they didn't make because of poor throws.
Which Collinsworth talked about, even on the last drive where they're driving down 14-10. Yeah. The 3rd and 2, he's got either the 3rd or 4th down, maybe both. He's got safety valve, check down, running backs available to move the chains. Yeah,
they were in position there. On that particular drive, I said to Krasinski sitting next to me, are they going to just hold the ball for the rest of the game and score a touchdown and win? And the Vikings, that felt like that was not out of the question. They eventually stopped them, and that was that. But there were definitely some poor throws from Flacco. I do think that part of the Flores defense is creating circumstances that make a quarterback, throw quicker than he wanted to, or think he has no time and he actually does have time, and throwing them off. So I don't want to just say that Flacco just on his own was terrible without it having anything to do with sort of the scheme that the Vikings were running. Because a lot of the scheme sometimes is what they can do on the front end, even if they're going to end up leaving somebody open, creating the circumstances which make it a lot harder to get it to that open receiver. And so that is at least part of what they try to do, and I think it probably played a role in what but had Flacco stood in there and been able to deliver those throws, maybe it's a different game.
Are you flat out predicting that victory was the start of what will ultimately be a 4-game winning streak?
A 4-game. So that would be, they beat the Colts, they beat the Jaguars, they beat the Titans, and they beat the Bears. I'm going to say there will not be a 4-game winning streak, but I think they win 3 of those 4. And I'm only saying that because...
Not a baggage in Chicago. You've seen a lot of weird things happen there.
And it's like...
The Bears might not even have a team by then, though.
Yeah. Or they might have a new coaching staff. Who knows? But I and it doesn't have any, I always say, like, the vibes, like the relevance of what's happened in the past at Soldier Field really shouldn't impact. I mean, the O'Connell Vikings have beaten
Jay Cutler's still not there
both times in Chicago. Right. They beat him at the end.
Lovey's gone.
Yeah, This is, there's no more Lovey Smith. This is, he's not there to save you anymore. And so, there's no intellectual reason or even schematic reason to think that the Vikings are going to play worse than they otherwise would just because they're at Soldier Field. It's the weekend before Thanksgiving, so could the weather be bad? Yes.
Peanut Tillman might punch a ball out.
Yeah,
who's to say?
Yeah. So I'm not saying they can't win there. I'm just not willing to commit to a 4-game winning streak quite yet.
As I said that, what the producer did, he shook his head. The easiest way to trigger Guardsy is mention Peanut Tillman, because he's convinced that those teams were the luckiest teams in the history of football, that it was all horseshoe as opposed to really great defensive plays.
You make your own
and
luck.
He still hasn't gotten over it. It's bizarre to me.
You know what actually triggers me?
You would die for a cornerback who could take the ball away the way Peanut did.
Peanut doesn't trigger me as much as he reminds me of Mike Brown.
Mike Brown, yes.
The safety who I think was awful. And always.
Well, it wasn't awful. He just was right place, right time a couple of times.
The deflected interceptions always seem to go right to him.
Good pass rush.
And that's fine, but that...
Urlacher.
Yeah, Urlacher. Mike Brown bothered me.
Yeah, they had some pretty good linebackers,
I get it.
didn't they?
I would say
Lance Briggs is pretty good.
I mean, do you think Mike Brown has been taking any L's anywhere on the air in the past 10 years other than right here, right now?
Only here.
No, that's the only show. It's
the only show.
The poor guy's retired. He's probably enjoying life with his family.
He doesn't need me.
Like to think that'd be the case. So you're saying 3 out of 4, which would still give them. So what are we now? Our record 6-2.
Yeah.
So that would put us at 9-3.
Yeah.
We win them all. We're 10-2 going into the tougher part once again of the schedule. All 3 of those games are road, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
That's the rub. None of them are good teams, but they are road games, as you say. Whether you play down a little bit, we're not great. Whatever the case may be. Real quick before we go. I saw you were, I think, tweeting in real time, and like most people, you see the way Mahomes kind of, stops himself on what looked to be like a significant non-contact injury.
That's the word.
And we're all going, finally caught up with him. And then you had the tweet, somebody had the tweet, he's Gumby. Yeah. He apparently, what we associate with serious injury with anybody else when they act that way, he just basically gets up, goes, gets examined for 5 minutes, and then he's sprinting across the field making the same circus plays. By the time they came back
from the commercial, he was totally fine. Yeah, that was Dr. Chow, who's one of the doctors who's on Twitter and tends to be actually really good at identifying serious versus non-serious injuries. And I just tweeted we need a bat signal to him right away. Right. And he was on Twitter and got right on there and said that it did not look serious. It looked like a after effect of a previous injury he'd had, and then he referred to him as Gumby. And that, I don't think that's a medical diagnosis. No, but it's effective. It's a good description.
Yeah, for sure. Are you on this trip?
Yeah.
We wouldn't miss it.
No. Jacksonville. I haven't been to Jacksonville in a long time.
Well, God bless you. Were you looking forward to Jacksonville, or
it'll be
nice weather?
Yeah, nice. It's almost Georgia. Jacksonville's almost Georgia. Yeah, it's more Georgia than Florida. So
Jacksonville, Nashville, and then the Windy City,
and then Chicago. Yeah, and then back for a 3-game homestand, right?
I think that's got to be.
Yes, right. Yeah. Arizona, Atlanta, Chicago.
And Arizona's not bad, by the way.
No, they've actually. I think Arizona. Kyler Murray is playing at a Pro Bowl level this year.
You know what he's doing? What I noticed in that monstrosity of a game against the Bears. He's taken the little play. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was, just what he was doing that day, or his numbers aren't fat, but I'm just noticing, all right, I'll dump it for 6 and then I'll let that guy do all the work rather than me scramble around for 22 minutes. It looked to me like maybe his coach, finally got a coach who's got across to him. You don't have to make the circus play all the time.
His offensive coordinator is Drew Petzig, I think is how he pronounced his name. Former Vikings quarterbacks coach under Stefanski. He's a buddy of Stefanski.
Had no idea.
Yeah,
interesting.
So, yeah, that's he's their offense is not too dissimilar from what the Vikings ran in those days.
For the record, 763 guy, that's Joe from White Bear Lake. Mike Brown was first team All-Pro in 2001.
Mm-hmm. I remember because he got like 8 gifts from all those interceptions. I remember it well. Trust me, it's burned into my brain. I was at the University of Iowa watching all of those games, and it drove me insane. Surrounded by Bears fans. We're going to get him
on the show.
Should we?
Yeah, maybe we should.
And I could tell him I thought he was overrated.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah, exactly.
That'd be helpful.
Seifert, thanks for coming in.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure, and we'll chat next week.
Okay.
Kevin Seifert, ESPN.com. We are going to go into the world of popular culture with our guy Jimmy Jam. Then Louie in the 5 o'clock hour, a couple of election items late as well. Stay tuned.
Time now for the Vikings Report on The Fan, presented by Miller Lite. Viking safety Cam Bynum joins Barrero next after this from Miller Lite.
Well, I thought immediately about our next guest when the news broke, was it yesterday morning, during the day? I'm not exactly sure, that Quincy Jones had passed away, I believe, at the age of 91 years old. And his schedule was very tight yesterday for a couple of the reasons he might be able to get into with us today. But Jimmy Jam, kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline a day later. Thank you, as always, for the time. Hope you are doing well, sir. And it was good to see you. You made it to a nice little courtside spot, I believe, for Game 4 of the Lynx WNBA Final Series, correct?
Yes, man, it was wonderful. Yeah, electricity in the arena was just off the charts, and I was glad to watch the team play. I think we should have. I think we got robbed in New York,
yes,
quite honestly.
Right,
but
it was a rough. Yeah, it was a very rough finish. Unfortunately, it got. But the level of interest, you could see that it's ratcheted up from years before, and turned out to be a very good run in a year where it's kind of hard to figure out what they were doing. But you always have been great about staying engaged. No matter how far you get from Minneapolis, you're never far from Minneapolis, as you've told us many, many times over the years. So tell us a little bit. I really was interested to hear your view as a well-decorated, experienced, world-class record producer who's been in this industry, understands this industry, and I think to that extent can articulate what makes others who are good at it, why they're good, where they stand out. When you hear the name Quincy Lewis and you're trying to I did it again. I don't know why I have this on my brain. My apologies. Yeah. When you say the name, what to someone who maybe doesn't know anything about the musical legacy, how do you best explain the influence and meaning of Quincy Jones musically?
So I have a saying that I always say about people that are record producers, because really the idea of a record producer is really to get the best performance out of it. It's very akin to what a director would be on a movie set. There's
sure.
Somebody that writes the script, but it's about getting the best performance, right? So Quincy was a master at doing that because he was so well versed in the language. He could be lingual in the music space. He was it. So he could talk to people that did opera music, people that did jazz music, people that did R&B music, people that did rap music. I mean, he really crossed over all the boundaries. And if you think about, he came up in the, Frank Sinatra era and ended, or not even, Jackson's career, you know, as you played Billie Jean as it was coming in, those were Quincy Jones production. And so if you think about just the time span that he was able to achieve, you know, these heights of greatness, that's part of it. But the other thing, my saying always is just because you can play the piano doesn't mean you can conduct the orchestra. There's a difference between doing what you do, and organizing the people to do it around you. And that's what Quincy was great at doing, was putting people in their best positions. He would pick the best songwriter, the best player, the best guitar player, the best, you know, keyboard player, whatever those people were. But then he was almost like, if you think of it like a coach of an all-star team, you know, get those guys to all play together, and do something great, and get people to, ego-wise, even step back a little from the fact that they can play so well and realize, you don't need to score all the points here. You know, you can assist on this, you can rebound here, whatever. Getting people in that proper place. So to be the correlation between what music does and what sports is. So I think he was the best at that for longevity, for obviously the success. But then if you want to think about statistics, he's won 28 Grammys. Okay, so when you say Terry and I are well decorated, yes, we are, but we've won 5. Okay, he's won 28 Grammys, and he's made probably the biggest. You know, we all know that music is that thing that whenever there's something in the world that's going on that's a bad thing, music is the thing to pull us out of it. Well, probably the biggest song that was ever done on that type of situation was "We Are the World."
Yeah,
okay,
right.
And that was, talk about an all-star team. Everybody from, you know, Bruce Springsteen. By the way, there's a great documentary on that too.
Yes.
I think it's called "The Greatest Night in Pop," and it explores all of those things. But "We Are the World" was that song that raised money, that brought everybody together, and that was done with Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie writing the song, and then Quincy producing it with all these great musicians, where he told everybody, check your ego at the door, and then pulled those kinds of things off. So there's so many ways. I mean, I could, keep going, but all of those things make him singularly, I think, the GOAT, as they say, like the greatest of all time.
How much contact did you have with him over the years? Did you spend any time with him? Did you learn anything from him, or was it was there, much of a relationship, or there not much of an opportunity to get to know him? What were the years like if you had any with him?
We actually had a great relationship with Quincy, and it was due to our relationship with Clarence Avant. If you watch Netflix, it's known as the Black Godfather, if anybody's seen that documentary. But Clarence was the one, when Quincy was searching for someone to produce one of his artists, Patty Austin, Clarence recommended us to do it. And we brought Patty to Minneapolis, and we thought we had booked 3 days because we were going to do 3 songs. And she literally sang all 3 songs in one day. She was amazing. And, but it gave us a chance to actually do Quincy Jones type things, like we were very much in machines in our. It was like, oh no, live arrangements, live drums. It was a whole different way of recording. So it was a great,
So
he was always.
I'm going to put Jimmy on hold real quick. Guardsy's going to work with him. We've had some glitches, and I don't want to lose too much of what Jimmy has to say. So I don't know if there's we may to try another phone call, maybe get him to move around. If there's something we could do, just so we don't lose our time with Jimmy Jam. Don't forget, Louis is going to join us in the 5 o'clock hour of the program, maybe including in the top 5 at 5 as well. We'll see how that goes. Plenty of hockey conversation coming up and some election talk coming up late on the show. Quincy Jones is the conversation right now with Jimmy Jam, and we're learning that he did get to know Jimmy, and his partner did get to know Quincy fairly well. So we'll get into that, and I have a number of other things I wanted to try to get into with him, and even some stuff regarding what Jimmy is up to, the latest stuff that he's up to these days. Bradshaw and Bryant, KFAN text line is open. That is 64686 if you might have a question or two. A lot of Vikings conversation early, including with Seifert, who is in studio. You'll have a chance to podcast that if you missed it. We're going to try it again, Guardsy, see how we do.
Yeah, and how about this for a flex? He says, it's a nice day out in L.A. I'm just going to do it outside the house. Gotta love that.
That might even be better. So now, as you're outside the house, does that mean you're looking directly upon the Pacific Ocean from your location?
But now we live in Brentwood
That's
area.
right.
So we're
that's
kind of right by UCLA.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that's good. Well, that's the beauty of it. You've been out there a while, so you gotta mix. You gotta move around a little bit, right? Get a little bit of variety. Correct.
Right. Can't get bored.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when we first moved out here, we lived in a place called Westlake Village, and it was the closest thing to Minnesota we could find. Clean air, trees, normal people,
right.
lakes. It was great. So that was our first.
That was your first one.
Yeah.
All right, you were saying I didn't want to miss too much of what you were saying about the Patty Austin experience and how that helped kind of bring you together and get to know Quincy a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I was cutting out there. Hopefully we got it fixed. But we got a great education working on it because we basically did a Quincy Jones record with strings and live instruments and that whole thing. And she came in and sang everything and literally. We had booked 3 days. She sang it all 3 songs in one day. And it was just such a musical education for us to do. But then we stayed in contact with each other because he was always around to give us advice. We got to know his family really well, and particularly his daughters, Rashida and Kadada. And we just always stayed in touch. We always were around. We would always be at different events with him. I was very happy when I became the chairman of the Recording Academy that we got a chance to give him a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yep.
And that was one of the first things I got a chance to do. So I was really happy about that.
I'm looking at a quote from Quincy that's gotten some attention the last couple of days that I did not remember. He once said, music was the one thing I could control. It was the one world that offered me freedom. When I played music, my nightmares ended. And it fascinated me because it seemed to say so much beyond just about his attachment to the music. And yet it feels like you hear that a lot from people, whatever their muse is, whatever their art is that they love, that to a certain extent, that is what it represents, that it frees them and puts them in a different place because everybody's got real world problems and everyday problems and so forth. And that in his case, it was the music and dealing with that music that freed him from whatever those nightmares are that he was referring to.
Yeah, well, music has an ability to do that. And I always say it's interesting now. There's so many people, Heaven is having a great jam session right now. And now they have the conductor for it, now with Quincy joining people up there. But I think that, yes, it does. It's an escape. It's a muse. I mean, I always think of music like oxygen to me. Like music in my life is like, if I can't have music in my life, it's like I can't breathe. And I remember, long ago, in my dating years, long before my married years, if a woman would say to me, you love your music more than you love me, that was always like, no, you don't get it. That's like saying I love oxygen more than I love you, which actually I do because I need oxygen. I don't want it. I need it. So I think what Quincy's saying is there's an elevated space that I think we feel when we are around music or making music. And the fact that, yes, we get a chance to actually control it in a sense because we actually, if we think of an idea, we have a chance to actually execute the idea, and we get to do it with, in our case, and in Quincy's case, of course, people who are so elevated in their art, in what they do. They're so talented. And I always say, listen, if you produce the right people, they just make you look good. So when we go in the studio with, a Mary J. Blige, who I just saw at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or somebody like that, they're going to elevate whatever it is you do. So you're in control of it, but it's still, there's an elevation that takes place that I think is so, it's divine to me. I call music the divine art.
No, I
really feel that's what it is.
Very well stated. And, when you talk about elevated talent, I go back to the Sinatra-Quincy marriage, musical marriage. Mm-hmm. And as the story goes that I read yesterday, I think I'd heard it before, but it was a good story yesterday. It's something effective. The first time they met, or the first time they worked together, that as Quincy recalled it, Sinatra didn't say much. He basically said, welcome, to the whatever the studio is. They were working on, this goes back, I think, this was even before the Sands album, going back to like 1958, maybe 59, and it was, hey, there wasn't much direction. It was, Quincy, you've heard the music, you know what to do. And
yes.
I tend to believe that, as silly as that sounds, if you are talking about elevated talent, whether we're talking about producing or musicians or singers, whatever, that it can be that simple. And they sort of, at their level, they do figure it out together intuitively, and it's almost natural.
Yeah. Well, it's speaking the same language. Like I said earlier, it's kind of like that musical language that great people are able to speak to each other. And so almost it's like knowing without knowing, sort of. And Quincy always said that Frank was his favorite because Frank stood up to him, or not stood up to him, but stood up for him in so many cases, back when, Quincy, once again, as a black man, didn't have or wasn't afforded some of the opportunities that some of the white conductors were. And I remember Basie on a couple of, or not Count Basie, but Frank Sinatra on a couple of the sessions just said, no, Quincy's my guy.
Yep.
Like, if he can't come here, then I'm not doing the session, or, whatever. So he really stood up for him, and Quincy was very vocal about that, how much he loved Frank. And, you need people like that in your corner. So not only, obviously, talented off the charts, but also just a good human being for, standing up for Quincy in a lot of ways.
Well, to that point, I can remember, I think this might have been a different live album. It wasn't the Sands, which has always been one of my favorite albums of all time. I just love that album. And,
I agree.
And you could probably explain it. I just feel it. You could probably explain it better because you know the business and it's your business. But what fascinated me is Frank was playing somewhere else, and he's introducing people in the crowd, and there are 2 or 3 actors, and then he introduced Quincy, who at that point had to be really young, and he basically said, I want to introduce you to this is one of the great up-and-coming music producers. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that was obviously very prescient of him, but how do you know? How does someone identify greatness in that role? How does a singer, how does a vocalist, or maybe even a musician, how does that happen? What do they pick up? What separates the great ones from, perhaps you'd say, the more ordinary ones?
Well, I think, the term is they have it. It's that it factor. And the thing is, it. And you know it because you've been around a bunch of people at that point in time. I'm guessing with Frank Sinatra, he had been around a ton of great musicians. But it's the same thing, to put it in another thing, this is the way sports. Dan, when you watch somebody play, you don't have to watch somebody for 4 years to know whether they're going to be good or whether they have something special. You can watch a football player, a basketball player, a baseball player, and you just know they have it. Like, there's something special. And you can see it. Now, it doesn't mean that people always live up to the potential of what they can do, but you can tell right away. When you look at a football field, you look at a basketball court, you can tell that guy. There's a lot of great guards in the league. And then there's Ant. Okay? He's special. Okay? There's something it's another level to him. And you just see it, and fans can see it. And that's the way music is too. When you hear somebody play, when you watch somebody conduct, when you whatever that experience is, you just kind of know. You just kind of innately know.
Yeah, and it was a great union, as you said, and also it is fair to say that I think Sinatra was one of the few, at the time, white artists who did in a number of different occasions, a number of different ways, basically, even a couple times in Vegas, say, if you're not going to let the performers stay in the hotel where we're staying, we're done. I'm done. And of course, he was one of the few people who had the power to pull that off. They may have been acquiescing for the wrong reasons, sadly enough, but that was the power that even then, at the time, Sinatra represented.
Yeah. And it was good because you have to have people that are like that stand up for what the right thing is. And when they get in that power, they actually use it for something that's good. And so I just think that at the end of the day, Quincy was one of those people that made everybody better for whatever reason. And I think Frank felt that, as did, Michael Jackson,
sure,
as did, Donna Summer when he worked with her. So just so many people over the years that he worked with, he elevated whatever he did. When he was in the room, it was a better room. If you were already a good player, I went to at the Hollywood Bowl, David Foster, who's another obviously great music producer. He just celebrated his 75th birthday, and he had as his drummer, basically the drummer that Quincy used on all of his records, a guy named John Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing listening to this dude play, but you realize that Quincy had a good way of picking out the talented people. Like, there'd be a ton of drummers, and then Quincy would go, but this guy is the one. And he's most famous for, everybody knows the beginning of Rock With You by Michael Jackson that has that drum fill.
Yep.
That's John Robinson. So he had an ability to identify talent and make the best of them, and it's pretty special.
Was he intimidating? I mean, I read some of the quotes as he got a little older, felt like maybe he was a little freer about being kind of blunt. Was he, again, he was obviously on such a huge, on his own plateau, basically, when you're talking about music producing. Was he did he become kind of an intimidating presence a bit?
We never felt intimidated by him. We certainly felt in awe of him, but no, we never really did. And I think it, like everything, when you get older, your patience gets a little short.
Yes.
And I will say that if you didn't come in prepared for what it was you were supposed to do, I don't think he had a very, good tolerance for that. I think when he was younger, he probably, as most of us would do, we'd be kind of like, okay, well, that's okay. We'll, whatever. But it's kind of like when you get a little older, you don't have the time to wait.
Right.
So if you're going to show up for a session and not be prepared or not have, the right music or the right equipment with you or whatever, I think there probably was a tolerance there that had kind of gone by the wayside later in his career. But around us, no. He was always wonderful and always told the greatest stories in such detail. You could literally, if you sat down with him, you could talk to him for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah,
and
I can't
it
even.
was
What a gold mine.
always amazing.
I can't even imagine. Yeah, I mean, like you said, the breadth and history. It's never ending. Who he worked with, who he came in contact. There's nobody who's important or legendary that he didn't. Right? I mean, you're going all the way back to Ray Charles, for God's sake.
Yes.
Yesterday, you were at a funeral, correct? Can you talk at all about that?
Yeah, so tough day yesterday, obviously in the music world. So Tito Jackson from the Jackson 5 who had passed away. They did his what they called his celebration of life yesterday, and it's one of the tragic things, obviously, when Mrs. Jackson was there and still doing actually really well. We were actually talking about a new card game that she's playing now. We used to play Uno together, but now she's got a new game that I guess, Janet told me that I have to play this with her mom now. So anyway, but it was the painful part for me was the fact that Tito's gone. 3 of his sons were there speaking on his behalf, which was beautiful because one of them actually toured with the Jacksons for a little bit later in Tito's life, because Tito had missed some gigs, so he filled in for him. So they talked about that a little bit. But then also just once again, when a son or a child dies before the parent does, that's just so tragic. So it was between Tito's sons and then Tito's mom being in the room. It was pretty emotional, obviously, but a great turnout of people from just kind of their whole career. And then, of course, and as we're going to the funeral, of course, that's when we hear about Quincy's passing. And like I said, we were just at the Hollywood Bowl the night before celebrating David Foster with, Quincy's drummer and the whole deal. So, yeah, it was really too bad. And then as we were leaving Then the Tito's celebration of life, I got a text that Tyka Nelson, Prince's
that's right,
sister, had passed away also. So, yeah, it's just a tough day musically. And I realize at this point in my life, it's not my parents' friends that are, passing away now. It's our peers.
That's it. Yeah. So much musical history, no question. Lastly, we probably should have talked about this sooner. Maybe next time we can in more detail, but I don't want to go without asking you a little bit, or to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your dad's new book, Deeper Blues. What can you tell us about this story?
So Deeper Blues is interesting because it's my dad's story, who's 97 years old, Cornbread Harris, as he goes by. He was my first professional gig as a kid. I played drums for his band, and it was it was great. I absolutely loved it. And so what was really cool about it was reuniting with him after 50 years of estrangement.
Yep.
At a certain point of our life, or my life, he basically just left one day and never came back. And through a series of circumstances, we kind of reunited. But one of the people that helped reunite us was the author of the book, a girl named Andrea Swinson. And we started doing these Zoom calls every Tuesday. She said, I go see your dad every Tuesday. We're trying to piece together some memories and different things. Would you come on and with us? And I did it. And we literally had a Zoom earlier today. We still, even though that the book is done, we still every Tuesday get together and just share stories and that. So it's really, I think it's a book that will touch everybody. In a way, it's very much, if it was a Hollywood script, you would go, that can't be true. Like, there's no way you're estranged for 50 years and then come back together. Like, that doesn't. And then go play a gig. I played a gig with my dad when we did the book launch a couple of months back. So
that.
It's pretty crazy story, but I think people will really enjoy it, and it's definitely a part of Minnesota history. He played on the very first rock and roll record that was done in Minnesota. And he has an anthology album out also that starts at 1955 recordings going through today. And he's actually entered in the Grammy process this year, so we'll see if he gets a nomination.
Well, yeah, we should dig deeper on this the next time, one of the next times, because the cliche. I laugh because the cliche about it's never too late, and we roll our eyes and say, but this is the ultimate it's never too late story, is it not? 50 years. I can't even imagine what that must have been like emotionally for you.
Well, for me, it very simply came down to, after my kids were grown. Like, it's tough. My partner Terry always says it's tough to criticize a boss if you haven't been a boss, right? So he always used to say that about Prince. Like, Prince, we made some decisions that we didn't agree with, like firing us, right? He always said we had never been a boss. So once we got in that position where we had to hire and fire people, we understood the position he was in. So then after my kids were grown, I felt I had to tell my dad I didn't feel any resentment. I didn't feel any bitterness towards him, because how could I at that point? But I also wanted to raise, if there was any guilt that he was feeling, I wanted to take that away from him. And he said that when I told him that, it was like euphoric for him. And so, like I say, we have a great relationship now. We don't rehash what happened in the past. It's all going forward at this point, which is very, I feel so blessed, that he always says, his saying is, I'm a blessed dude. And he is, and I am too.
We're blessed to have you on, man. We always appreciate the time you give us. I love talking music with you, as you know, especially. So be well, and we'll try to stay in touch and hopefully talk again soon.
Sounds good, Dan. Thank
Always
you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. That is Jimmy Jam Harris, one of our favorite musical guests. Went along because there was a lot of ground to cover with him. Plenty of time to stretch out and chat with Luigi. Maybe he'll be part of a mini Top 5 at 5. We'll get a couple of Vikings headlines in there. And then we'll talk plenty of Minnesota Wild and more hockey at all levels when we come.